That day, my parents organized a grand party to celebrate my brother's engagement. Upon opening my gift, I was faced with a notification for a court hearing. "You should be grateful," my mother scoffed with a cynical smile. Without a word, I gathered my things and left. A week later, they called, desperate. "Please, we didn't mean it." Hello, everyone. I'm a 27-year-old woman, and let's just say the family dynamics at home have always been complex. And to begin with, I'll tell you that this situation didn't arise overnight. It's the result of years, decades, really, of silent favoritism, subtle jabs, unspoken expectations, and a lot of pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I didn't grow up in a house where people yelled at each other or threw things. Instead, it was the kind of home where silence could be more deafening than any scream, and smiles could be sharper than knives. I'm the younger of two children. My older brother, George, is 30 years old. For my parents, Morgana and Julius, he has always been the star. Since we were kids, it was clear that George was impeccable in their eyes. He had a natural charm, the kind of person who simply knows how to say the right thing, wear the right clothes, make the right impression. Teachers loved him. Family friends adored him. Even when he made mistakes, and he made quite a few, there was always an excuse, always a justification. "Oh, George is just witty," they'd say. "He has a strong personality. He always lands on his feet." Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the quiet one. I followed the rules, kept my head down, did well in school, got into a decent university, and built a stable career in technology. But in our house, stability wasn't exciting, it didn't draw attention, it wasn't something that deserved a toast at family dinners. I used to ignore it, tell myself that I didn't need their approval. And maybe for a while, I actually believed it. But when you spend your whole life watching your brother be showered with praise for doing the bare minimum, while you receive silence or, worse, criticism for doing everything right, it starts to wear you down. My relationship with my parents became more distant after I moved out at 23. I bought a small apartment in a quiet area, about 30 minutes from their house. I would visit them on holidays, sometimes stop by for birthdays or Sunday lunch, but that was it. Every time I was there, I felt like a visitor, a stranger. Even when I brought homemade food or offered to fix their router or update their devices, things George would never think of doing. That barely earned a nod. George, on the other hand, practically lived at their house, despite having his own apartment. He was always there, eating their food, borrowing the car, using the backyard as if it were his own. My parents acted as if it were adorable, as if it were good that he remained so connected. They never mentioned that he was well into his 20s, living rent-free, while I was juggling my budget to pay my mortgage and save for the future. Anyway, the real story begins about 2 months ago, when George announced he was getting married. The news dropped in the family chat like a bomb. My mother was ecstatic. She immediately called me, not to give me the news, but to ask if I could help set up some decorations for a surprise engagement dinner they were organizing for the following weekend. I didn't even know he had proposed. I said, "Sure, because that's what I do. I show up, I help, even when it feels thankless." I arrived early that day, and the house was buzzing. My mother had transformed the backyard into something out of a magazine. Twinkling lights were strung all over the patio. There were white and gold balloons tied to every chair, and a huge banner with George and Marcy written in elegant cursive hung on the back fence. There was a food truck parked outside, and they had hired 2 waiters to serve tiny appetizers I couldn't even pronounce. It wasn't just a dinner. It was an event. As usual, I looked for a quiet corner and made myself useful. I helped hang the lights, carried folding chairs, and arranged the tables. No one really noticed. My father gave me a brief nod when I finished moving a cooler full of drinks, but that was it. When the guests started arriving, I felt like I was fading into the background. Old family friends I hadn't seen in years walked right past me to hug George. Some asked me, "So, what have you been up to lately?" with that vacant look that told me they didn't really care about the answer. One even mistook me for one of the staff. I didn't bother to correct him. George and Marcy finally arrived, and there was the whole grand entrance with music, applause, and cheers. My mother got emotional. My father raised a glass. George savored every second, flashing his perfect smile, acting surprised, although everything was clearly planned. Marcy seemed genuinely happy, I have to admit. She came over to me, hugged me, thanked me for coming, and asked if I wanted to sit with them. I said no, thank you, and found a spot near the back with a view of everything. Observing from afar had become second nature to me. Then, sometime after the main course was served, my mother stood up and lightly tapped her glass with a fork. The crowd fell silent. She stood there beaming, as if it were her big night, and began to talk about love, family, and how proud she was of George. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "We also have something for our other daughter," she announced, "who has also made some big decisions lately." I blinked. What? People turned to look at me. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there awkwardly as she walked towards me with an envelope in her hand, a thick envelope. My stomach churned. Something felt wrong. I didn't know why, but I had the feeling I was being watched, not with pride, but with amusement, as if I were the punchline of a story I didn't even know I was part of. My mother smiled as she handed me the envelope. "We wanted to support you in your next chapter," she said loudly for everyone to hear. I opened it, and everything stopped. Inside the envelope was a stack of papers, legal documents. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. The text was dense, printed on thick white paper, and the header had that cold, official font that I usually only saw in government forms. I flipped through the first few pages, scanning without processing, until my eyes locked on a sentence that made everything around me go silent. Notice of civil action filed in the name of Morgana and Julius Garcia. I read it again. I raised my eyes. My mother was still smiling. It wasn't a warm smile, not even a fake sympathetic smile. It was a smug smile, as if she expected that moment to have a different impact, as if she thought I would thank her. My fingers tightened on the envelope. I went back to the papers and started to read, to really read. They were suing me. They were suing me for what they called long-standing financial obligations incurred during the period of dependency. In simpler terms, they were demanding that I reimburse them for my upbringing, housing, food, school costs, medical bills, and even clothes. There was a line about uncompensated emotional labor that blurred my vision for a second. They had detailed everything, page after page of carefully calculated numbers. I said nothing I couldn't. My ears were ringing. Around us, people were whispering. Marcy looked completely stunned. George was frozen with a half-smile, looking from me to the papers as if he had just realized that something had gone terribly off-script. I finally spoke, my voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "What is this?" My mother's smile didn't waver. "It's just a formality," she said in an overly sweet voice. "You always talked about being self-sufficient. This is just a way to balance things out." I stared at her, incredulous. As if I hadn't already spent my entire adult life working twice as hard to receive half the recognition. As if I hadn't gone out of my way to respect their boundaries, showing up when they asked, helping them with everything they needed, and asking for nothing in return. And now they were suing me in front of a crowd, at a party. I looked at my father, stupidly hoping that maybe this had gone too far, even for him. That maybe he would intervene and say it was ridiculous. But he just stood there, silent, with his hands crossed in front of him. He couldn't even look me in the eye. That hurt more than I expected. I could feel people watching, waiting to see how I would react. Some looked uncomfortable, some confused. A woman in the back was actually giggling softly, as if she thought it was a joke. I carefully folded the papers and put them back in the envelope. I didn't rush, I didn't make a scene, but I felt something inside me close, like a door I had kept open for years finally shutting without a sound. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the backyard. No one followed me, not my mother, not my father, not even George. I drove home in silence. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat in my building's garage for a long time, my hands still on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The envelope was on the passenger seat, as if it were made of stone. I didn't answer their calls that night or in the following days. Days turned into weeks. Eventually, I received an email from a lawyer, their lawyer, requesting a response by the end of the month. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I already knew exactly what I was going to do. A few weeks went by with no news from them. Then, one day, out of the blue, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it twice. It was my father. He didn't sound like himself. He was hesitant, uncertain, as if he had just realized the weight of what they had done. "Please," he said, "we didn't mean it. It was your mother's idea. We didn't think you'd take it seriously." I didn't call back. It had been a few weeks since I received that voicemail from my father. I hadn't replied, hadn't even given it much thought at first. But as time went on, I started to feel something growing inside me. It wasn't just anger. It was the realization that this wasn't just about some legal papers or a poorly timed family dinner. It was about years of being overlooked, disrespected, and treated like a supporting character in my own life. The more I thought about it, the more I knew I couldn't just let it go. I wasn't going to back down. They wanted me to prove something to them? Well, now it was my turn to make them prove their worth to me. The first thing I did was hire my own lawyer. I wasn't sure where this was going to lead, but I knew I needed someone who could navigate the mess my parents had created. After a long consultation, we decided to file a countersuit for emotional distress and financial manipulation. The lawyer agreed that I had a strong case. It was clear that this wasn't a mere misunderstanding. It was a deliberate maneuver on their part to hurt me. They wanted money, yes, but they also wanted control, and I wasn't willing to let that happen. I remember the first time I spoke to my lawyer about the countersuit. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the papers spread out in front of me, and I realized something. I had spent most of my life trying to get their approval, whether it was by doing the right thing, being responsible, making the correct decisions. But now I was going to take back control. This wasn't about money, not even about retaliating in the way they might have expected. No, I wasn't going to make a scene, wasn't going to yell or scream. I was going to hit them where it hurt the most, their precious reputation, the one they cared about more than anything else. I was going to show them that they couldn't walk all over me anymore. In the following weeks, I gathered everything I could to build my case. Text messages, emails, documents, anything that proved how much they had taken from me, how their actions had affected my mental health, my career, and my personal life. My lawyer helped me structure everything. She made it clear that we would have to approach this carefully, but that there was enough evidence to build a strong case. Once everything was ready, we filed the lawsuit. The news reached my parents about a week later. I had made sure the proceedings weren't private, and the last thing my parents wanted was for their friends, colleagues, and the people they tried so hard to impress to know that their daughter was taking them to court. And then the call started. At first, I didn't answer. I didn't want to engage. But one afternoon, about 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, I found myself standing in my kitchen with the phone in my hand. I had been avoiding my mother's calls for days, but this time something told me I had to pick up. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is this some kind of joke?" My mother's voice was trembling, not with anger, but with desperation. "We never wanted it to come to this. You know that, don't you?" I leaned against the counter, taking a deep breath before speaking. "You're the ones who made it come to this, Mom. I didn't want any of this, but you pushed me into a corner. I tried for years to make you proud, to do things your way, and all I got in return was manipulation and disrespect." There was silence on the other end for a moment. I could almost hear her searching for the right words. "Don't be ridiculous," she finally said, her voice tight. "This isn't how you repay your family. This isn't how you treat us." I wasn't going to back down now. "No, this is how you treat me," I said. "You and Dad always put George above me, and I always had to settle for the leftovers. But enough is enough. I'm not playing this game anymore." I could hear her breathing heavily, probably trying to compose herself. "You're making a huge mistake," she said, her voice low, almost pleading. "Please, let's talk about this, let's fix it. You don't want to go through with this, it's going to destroy this family." "Funny," I said. "I thought that was already happening." I hung up before she could reply. That night, I felt nothing. It wasn't relief, it wasn't joy. It was just calm. It was as if I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for so long. I had taken my first step towards doing something for myself, something that didn't involve trying to please anyone else. The following days were tense. My parents didn't contact me directly again, but I knew they were talking to other family members. I started receiving messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, asking if it was true, if I was really suing my parents. Some were concerned, others just curious. Some people told me I was being dramatic or overreacting, but the truth was, those weren't the people I cared about anymore. They weren't the ones who were there when I was the one constantly giving, trying my hardest, and receiving nothing in return. As for George, he didn't reach out either. I didn't expect him to. He was too busy basking in the spotlight of his own engagement. He had always been good at pretending everything was fine, pretending he didn't see the cracks in our family. He wasn't going to change now. Days turned into weeks, and things between my parents and me remained silent. No one reached out with apologies. No one tried to reconcile. They didn't realize that the longer they waited, the worse it would get. Their reputation, everything they had worked so hard to build, was starting to crumble. It wasn't long before they realized they had made a huge mistake. I could almost feel it in the air, like the slow dawning awareness that they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Then, one day, I received another voicemail from my father. I didn't listen to it immediately. I knew what was coming. They were panicking now. They had underestimated how far I was willing to go. When I finally played the message, his voice was frantic. "Please, we didn't mean it. We just wanted you to understand. We didn't want it to come to this. Please forgive us." I listened to the message a few times, my expression unreadable. The apology wasn't for me, not for what they had done, but for the trouble they were in. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. A few more weeks had passed since my father's frantic voicemail, and I had to admit I was expecting that call. They thought they could smooth things over with an apology, thought that if they played the victims enough, I would cave and everything would go back to normal. That's how it always happened, right? I was the one who repeatedly gave in, but not this time. I didn't respond to his voicemail. Instead, I waited. Then the letter arrived. It was from my lawyer, and when I saw the envelope, my stomach dropped. I didn't know what to expect anymore, but this felt different. It wasn't an email or a call. It was real. I opened it carefully, my hands steady, and read the contents. The letter was from their lawyer, requesting a meeting to discuss a settlement. A settlement? I almost laughed. They didn't want to go to court, didn't want their dirty laundry aired in public any more than I did, but they had pushed me too far. I didn't need their settlement, but the lawyer in me recognized that this was a moment. They were finally acknowledging that they were in serious trouble. I responded in kind, agreeing to a meeting, but I made it clear that this wasn't about money, not even about the legal case. It was about making them face the reality of what they had done. When the day of the meeting arrived, I walked into the conference room with a calm that surprised even myself. My lawyer was by my side, prepared to handle the legal side of things. The Garcias arrived a few minutes later. My mother's face was tight, her smile absent, and my father, who had once been so sure of everything, looked like he had aged 10 years in the past few weeks. The weight of their actions had finally caught up to them. They sat down across from me, the tension palpable. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. I wasn't there to hear any more of their excuses, wasn't there to hear how they didn't want things to have gotten this far. I was done being their emotional punching bag, done trying to be the daughter who forgave them at every turn. This time, I was in control. "Here's the thing," I began, my voice steady. "I don't want money. I don't want anything material out of this. What I want is for you to understand that everything that has happened over the years wasn't just hurtful, it was cruel. And I want you to acknowledge that." My mother's face flushed. "We never intended to hurt you," she said quickly, trying to regain control of the conversation. But I wasn't letting her. "Yes, you did," I said. "You took advantage of me for years. You always saw me as a tool to get what you wanted. I wasn't allowed to have my own life, my own dreams. You manipulated me into taking care of you while sidelining me at every opportunity." They were silent. My father looked like he wanted to speak, but I could see the resignation in his eyes. This wasn't a situation where they could guilt-trip me, not when the truth was laid bare. "I want a public and official apology," I continued, "and I want it to be clear to everyone who has always assumed you were the perfect family. I want them to know what really happened. I want everyone who has ever treated me like the villain in this story to understand the truth. That's the price of your apology. Not money, not possessions. I'm not letting you off the hook." They didn't say anything immediately. My mother's eyes darted to the floor, then to my father, and back to me. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. The expression on her face was almost unreadable. Part disbelief, part wounded pride, but there was something else behind it too, fear. Not the dramatic, tearful kind she used to feign when trying to guilt-trip me, but a quiet, dawning realization that the tables had finally turned. She wasn't in control anymore. She hadn't expected me to dictate terms, certainly not terms that involved making their behavior public. In her mind, apologies were whispered privately, if given at all, and then swept under the rug where no one had to acknowledge them again. She wasn't prepared for long overdue consequences. I don't think she believed consequences applied to her. But this wasn't a suggestion, wasn't a conversation where they could change the subject or twist my words into something more convenient. This was a demand, and by the look on her face, I knew she had realized it. My father finally broke the silence, his voice a little hoarse, as if he hadn't used it in days. "You can't do that," he said slowly, deliberately, as if he still expected me to reconsider. "It will ruin everything we've built." I let the words hang in the air before responding. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he was actually saying. "Everything you've built," I repeated, keeping my voice calm. "Do you mean the image, the illusion of being the perfect family, the pretense of being generous, loving parents who always had their children's best interests at heart?" He didn't answer, his jaw tight. "You built your reputation on manipulation," I said, my voice gaining firmness now, "on emotional blackmail, control, and exploiting people to serve your needs. You taught me that my feelings were inconvenient, that my successes only mattered if they benefited you. You painted me as difficult whenever I wanted something different from what you had planned for me." I turned my gaze to my mother. "You pushed me into roles I never wanted and made me believe I owed you everything. You made me feel selfish for even dreaming of independence. But that ends now." The room fell silent again, except for the faint sound of someone shifting in their chair, maybe the other lawyer. The silence was heavy and long. I could feel their discomfort growing like a kettle about to boil. My mother opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Maybe she was realizing that no amount of protesting would change the fact that the people around us would find out, that they would finally see behind the mask. "I'm not here for money," I said, my voice low but steady. "This isn't about a payout or revenge. It's about the truth. It's about reclaiming what you tried to take from me, my voice, my right to be seen and heard, and not twisted into something convenient for you." My lawyer slid a folder across the table. Inside was the drafted statement. Not a vague, half-hearted apology, not the kind of polished PR note they would probably have preferred, but an honest, specific admission of what they had done. The way they had emotionally manipulated me, how they had involved me in financial matters without my knowledge or consent, the way they had excluded me from family decisions but used my name and reliability to further their image. The statement would be shared privately with everyone involved, relatives, mutual friends, former mentors, and posted publicly on a family group page my mother used to constantly update with pictures of holiday dinners and proud announcements about George. There would be no comment exclusions, no backing down. It was part of the settlement. They stared at the folder as if it were a trap, as if signing it would open a door they would never be able to close again. And maybe it would. There was a long pause, then finally, slowly. They both nodded slowly. The weeks that followed were intense. The apology was posted, and the reaction was immediate. Some relatives reached out to say they had always suspected something was wrong. Some apologized for never asking questions, for assuming my distance was just my being moody or ungrateful. Others didn't say much, but I saw them quietly leave the family group, choosing a side with no drama, of course. Not everyone believed the apology. There were still those who clung to the version of my parents they had known for decades, the ones who gave generous wedding gifts and hosted elaborate family gatherings. But the narrative had shifted. There was a crack in the mask now, and it wasn't going away. I got a message from George a few days after the apology was shared. Short, cold. "I don't know what you're doing," he wrote, "but you've changed. You're not the same person who used to beg for approval. I don't like it. I stared at that message for a long time. He was right, in a way. I had changed. I wasn't the same person who helped plan his wedding, who offered to proofread his speeches or run errands for Mom because she didn't trust anyone else. I had stopped being the reliable background character in everyone else's life. I had stepped forward, and some people didn't like it. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. My parents called a few times after that, once to ask if I would consider making a new post clarifying some of the harsher words in the statement, another time to mention they had received fewer invitations to holiday parties than usual this year. I let both calls go to voicemail. I didn't owe them any more comfort. Months passed. I threw myself into my work, into friendships that actually made me feel safe and seen. I reconnected with people I had drifted away from because of the chaos my family had created around me. Slowly, I felt something unfamiliar begin to settle in my chest. Peace. No, I didn't get the perfect closure. There was no tearful confession or grand gesture of reconciliation. My parents never really changed, not in the way I used to hope they would. But I got something better. I got out. I got clarity. And I was able to walk away knowing that, for the first time, I didn't cave, I didn't play the role they had written for me. I stood up and told the truth. I was no longer their daughter, no longer their scapegoat, no longer their doormat, their shield, their excuse. Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your story with us here in the comments. We'd love to hear it. If you enjoyed this story, please like and share this video and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories.